Welcome back to Real Food Mental Health. My name is Cody Cox. I am your host, and today's guest talks with me about gut health. Now, I know this is a kind of a redundant topic in the field of holistic psychotherapy or holistic psychology. That's because I think most of us, even conventional therapists, have this general idea of the gut-brain connection. It's super important, but the problem is most of us don't really know what to do about it. So I think it's important to get different guests who can talk on this topic so that we can learn some different things that we might not have heard before. So don't just click away or tap away and find some other podcast to listen to if you think you know all about gut health. There might actually be something in here that you didn't already know. There were certainly a few things that I didn't know. So today's guest is a true serial entrepreneur and inventor with an impressive background that includes 3 U.S. patents. Armed with a bachelor's degree in geology and an MBA, this dynamic individual is not only a thinker but also a doer. His name is Gabe Dough. You may recognize him as a regular guest on various podcasts and radio shows, including the insightful Nino's Corner. I have not heard of that podcast, but I might check it out. He passionately engages people in conversations about gut health, which he believes is central to our well-being as individuals and as a society. He is a founder and creator of Good Brew, spelled BRU, a remarkable prebiotic and probiotic product that's revolutionizing gut health in America. Good Brew is backed by over 25 clinical studies and 45 published research papers showcasing its effectiveness. He loves sharing how Good Brew helps build better guts and ultimately better health, empowering countless individuals who have struggled to find solutions elsewhere. So even if you aren't struggling with mental illness, I do want to remind everybody that all disease begins in the gut, as it was said by Hippocrates very, very long ago. So this essentially is it's an overall health episode, not just a mental health episode. And so you'll hear my guest, Gabe, talk about that, but we do allude to mental health eventually. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. Welcome to the Real Food Mental Health Podcast, where we explore the powerful connection between mental and physical health. My name is Cody Cox, a holistic nutritional psychotherapist, and I'm here to guide you on a journey to true wellness, mind, body, and spirit. If you're tired of quick fixes and want real solutions that address the root cause, you're in the right place. Let's get started on your path to lasting wellness. All right, welcome, Gabe.
Hey, very nice to be on the show, Cody. I can't wait to have this discussion. I think it's going to be very beneficial to your audience.
Yeah, so I'd be interested in, why don't I have you just tell me about your background a little bit to start out? How did you get into doing what you're doing now?
So I'm an entrepreneur, and I was doing some work around seafood and seafood technology back quite a few years ago. I had a couple of patents related to that. But while I was in graduate school, I worked in the Office of Technology Transfer at the university, and we were discussing multiple sclerosis at the time and some research that was going on with MS at the university. And the topic came up that at this time, it was what would be sort of a fringe theory that MS was related to the gut and the gut microbiome. And so that sort of stuck in my mind. And as I was working on my other project, going to a lot of food shows, trade shows, I was a member of the Institute of Food Technologists, and that was a key point when I went to an Institute of Food Technologists conference. I saw some things that ended up becoming what is now Good Brew, the product that the company that we formed. But that was quite a few years ago. As an entrepreneur, we went through some. Well, as I've said, I was working on one project, but we did one iteration of the Good Brew product that was too complicated to make, so we had to kind of set that aside. And we came back few years later, and made it what it is today. Now, I also had some severe gut health issues related to GERD and acid reflux during that period of time, and I think I solved that problem. And in doing that, I think it made me really say, hey, Gabe, you've got to stay on this as an entrepreneur. You've got to stay on this path that you were on with the gut health, the probiotics. You were onto something. It's a big deal, and now you've dealt with your own problem, and these things are curable, from lifestyle changes and changing the gut microbiome and whatever other things that we might need to do to heal ourselves. Whereas the medical community is absolutely not budging on really trying to come up with cures for these things. I mean, they're giving people antacids and proton pump inhibitors, and then ultimately surgeries for that one specific condition I was just talking about. But it's like that with many things. It just seems to be a big resistance towards from the mainstream medical community to really try to help people heal themselves. That's not to say that individual doctors, I think that, and you be in the medical, field, so to speak, I mean, and as a nutritionist, I'm sure you see this all the time. You're like, how can I talk to this doctor off the record? And he's totally on board with all of these things, but in his practice, he's following the script, because you hear that all the time. Some of the best conversations I have are with doctors and people in the medical community. And somebody told me once, if you really want to have a good ally, find a retired doctor so they don't have to answer to anybody.
Right. They're so
Yeah,
afraid of losing their license and
yeah,
losing their career that they worked so hard for. And I kind of don't blame them. I
right.
mean, they're just doing the best they can, but I totally agree with you on this. And I mentioned before we started recording, I don't usually like talking with other therapists because therapists are very conventional in their perspective too. It's all about talk therapy, which honestly I practice, but I like to talk about the nutrition, the biochemical side of mental health, because that's really what's causing this epidemic of mental illness that we as a country are finding ourselves in
Yep.
the last 30, 40 years.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And if we look at the history of, let's say, the gut microbiome, if we go back to when antibiotics started to become prevalent, World War II, every generation since then has had a big decrease in the diversity of their microbiome of people in the modern Western world. If they look at indigenous people and tribal people, they'll see that they still have this diversity in their microbiome, and that correlates largely with all of these modern diseases that you mostly see as diseases of the advanced society, it was, so to speak, the technologically advanced societies like the Western, like Europe and the United States and Australia, et cetera. But a lot of these, like MS, that was one of the things going back to that. You see very little MS in Africa, and that was what got this one guy thinking on this theory that now is quite a well respected theory, that the gut plays a major role in these inflammatory diseases. They're also seeing this in cognitive health, both on just the everyday cognitive health, anxiety and stress and depression, but now also very closely related to these chronic diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. They've actually now got some studies that are showing um, like a cause and effect, that's you got some really good credibility behind them. A lot of it has to do with the oral microbiome and the pathogen, like the gingivitis causing bacteria, cavity causing bacteria, translocating to the gut being in dysbiosis, and those toxins and even the bacteria themselves getting outside of the digestive tract and making their way to the central nervous system, where then the immune system starts to fight those toxins and pathogens, eventually ending in Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. And with Parkinson's disease, they're also seeing a correlation between the cell's ability to utilize iron correctly. And that then has like a downstream connection to the gut through B vitamins. So the gut microbiome plays a major role in how well we both absorb B vitamins from the food that we're eating, but the microbiome actually produces B vitamins as metabolites. And so they're seeing this correlation between, which they've known for a long time, there's a correlation between poor gut function and Parkinson's disease. But now they're saying this may very well be related to the fact that in dysbiosis, you're not producing proper B vitamins, which is now causing cellular metabolic problem issues, which is causing other diseases, Parkinson's being being one of those. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned indigenous cultures, and I'm actually, interestingly, I'm reading a book currently. It's called Undoctored by Dr. William Davis. And in fact, I just read this morning. He was talking about indigenous cultures as well and their gut health, and how in our modern world we can never really totally match up to the gut health of indigenous cultures, as at least as far as those of us who are living in industrialized countries like the United States of America. We've got environmental toxins all around us. You go to the grocery store and you have to use the restroom. What do they have? Antibacterial soap. That affects your gut microbiome. Synthetic fragrances, even just stuff in the air, stuff in the water, chlorine that you're drinking from your tap water, that can mess with your gut microbiome. We've got a lot of things in our environment that are wreaking havoc on our health. And that's where supplementation might be necessary. So, probiotics. You've got a product, it's called Good Brew, if I remember right.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Spelled BRU. Good BRU. Yep.
Yeah.
Good brew.
Okay. Good Brew with the BRU. Can you tell us what's in that and how you formulated it?
Yeah, it's very simple. It's very, very, and that's what I love about it is it's just we don't put any preservatives, any additives. It's a organic inulin fiber and a spore-forming probiotic, Bacillus coagulans, and that specific strain of Bacillus coagulans has 25 clinical studies behind just that specific strain, and like 45 or more research papers on that specific strain. And then when you look at Bacillus coagulans as a species of probiotic, there's hundreds of papers written on Bacillus coagulans. This one specific strain actually has some very specific research backing it for protein utilization, immune function, and digestive function. So it could increase protein utilization by 20%. The reason that is because the microbiome plays a huge role in breaking down proteins, which also has a big role in all these other functions within our body. So just on that one little key point, if your microbiome, so as we digest food, the enzymes in our stomach and our small intestines start to break down proteins, et cetera. But a huge chunk of the role of breaking down proteins goes to the gut microbiome. And if you, as you know, the body doesn't absorb whole proteins. It uses amino acids and peptides, which are largely created by the microbes breaking down these proteins. And if we have dysbiosis, we don't break down these proteins correctly. But it's more than that. There's this huge synergistic thing going on. If your gut microbiome is in dysbiosis, you start to have problems with your mucosal lining and epithelial cells in your digestive system, which then starts to allow things to get outside of the gut before they're supposed to, and lipids get outside, go through the lymphatic system. The proteins are supposed to get broken down in amino acids, peptides, and go into the bloodstream and through the liver. But one of the things that causes these inflammatory problems is that these whole proteins aren't getting broken down, and on top of the fact then that we have a weakened epithelial lining to the digestive system. So some of these whole proteins go out with the lipids, go into the lymphatic system, and that sparks a major immune response and antigen production from our body's immune system, which then really starts to feed these inflammatory responses. And so with our product, where you're using a spore-forming probiotic that is a transitory probiotic found in nature, it survives through the stomach and the stomach acid. And then when you use that in combination with the organic soluble inulin fiber, which is the kind of fiber that our gut microbiome has fed on and evolved on over millennia, you both get the benefits of that probiotic in and of itself, but you also get the benefits of those two things working together to start to establish an environment in the lower intestine that supports the rest of your microbiome. And getting to the point about the indigenous people and tribal people is we inherit our microbiome, the colonizing microbiome, from our mothers through birth, and through breastfeeding. And you can see, like with the C-sections, people have a very poor microbiome because they don't have a chance to pick that up from their mothers. But nature has done a wonderful thing. We have the colonizing microbes, the lactobacillus, the bifidobacteria, the Akkermansia, these. But then there's these spore-forming probiotics that we would get when we're eating things from the soil and from the earth. And they have the benefit of being very complementary to the colonizing microbes. So when you take Bacillus coagulans, it survives through the stomach, and it could also survive in your coffee. So if you're a coffee drinker, that's what we call it good brew, because you can actually put this probiotic in your coffee. It doesn't affect it at all because it wants to bloom and germinate in the lower intestine. You can put it in other things too, juice, yogurt, whatever. But but it makes it very convenient to use in that way, and it works in a way that supports. It's very supportive of the overall microbiome. I think a lot of times you hear about probiotics and it sounds very confusing because they're saying take this one, take that one, or take this combination of them. Everybody's microbiome is completely unique to yourself. Now, of course, there's similarities between people who live closely together and families and that sort of thing, but it still is unique to you as your thumbprint is. And so it's very hard to you figure out exactly which probiotics are important to you, but B, those most of those probiotics don't survive. They're not meant to survive out in the open, so they don't survive very well on the shelf, and they don't survive through your stomach and your stomach acid. So even if they're the ones that you do need, are they really actually making their way to the gut and doing what they need to do? The other thing is the prebiotic fiber is an essential part of this process, and in the capsules and those sorts of things, you really can't put enough of that fiber in the capsule to really be significant. So by using something in a scoop form, um, you can actually manage it to get the amount that works for you, find what works for you. A lot of our customers on our product specifically just use one scoop, maybe two scoops. I use two scoops, and it doesn't and it allows them to manage it for themselves when you get a significant amount of that prebiotic fiber that feeds the microbiome, which gets into these things like production of short chain fatty acids. This is really important to our overall health, mental health, and every other aspect of our health and physiology. Is short chain fatty acids are produced solely by the microbiome. The body does not produce any of these short chain fatty acids, yet they're totally essential to life itself. We get a little bit of these from our foods we eat, but 95% of them come from your gut microbiome producing these short chain fatty acids. So when you get into dysbiosis, your cells start to struggle to find these short chain fatty acids. These short chain fatty acids provide like 70% of the needed energy sources for the cells in the digestive system. Then they go and circulate through the body, where they also provide a fuel source for the cells throughout the body. And when we're in dysbiosis and we're not producing these short chain fatty acids in proper amounts, our cells struggle to find energy sources. And that's where you also end up in a lot of metabolic issues with the cells because you have dysbiosis. So there's this chain reaction through the body, but it's that inulin fiber, that soluble fiber that the microbes feed on, that then they convert into the short chain fatty acids. And so there's many fibers on the market that they maybe call prebiotic, but the big companies, the biggest ones on the market, are not fibers that our microbiome evolved on. They're using wheat dextrin and corn dextrin and synthetic fibers and calling them prebiotic, but they are not the fibers that the microbiome evolved on. And we use the short chain organic inulin fiber. There are long chain inulin fibers also that have been developed for the food industry for helping to stabilize foods and that sort of thing. And they're probably not as good for your microbiome as the natural short chain inulin fiber that we use that comes from the agave plant.
Yeah, I mean, fiber, it's so important. I think most of us have this idea that we should have it for regular bowel movements, which is still good. But most importantly, it's like you were saying, if it's coming from, especially if it's coming from wheat, it's not really what your probiotics want, what the good microbes want. So you definitely need to have a higher quality prebiotic fiber. I was thinking though, I usually like to tell people you can't out supplement a poor diet. And so with this product, Good Brew, have you found that there are people who take it even when they're not necessarily eating a good diet and they still have a benefit from it?
Oh yeah, we have we have a very high reorder rate for our industry. It's over 50%. Um, And yes, we get testimonials from across the board for people who are using it. Now, of course, if I talk to somebody or we talk to customers, I always tell them you need to do everything. You need to see what you're eating and adjust your diet and get more exercise and all of these things. And that's one thing about the gut and the gut microbiome. I think people need to understand it. It's as central to your health as it's not secondary or tertiary. It's central, just like exercise and sleep are central. Your diet's central. Your gut microbiome is central. So yes, we do see people who have. So we'll talk about this constipation and IBS and that sort of stuff in a few different ways because we see people who have suffered with chronic constipation for like years and gone to tried everything under the sun, and our product has helped them. That's not going to say it's going to help every single person, but I have plenty of testimonials of people who have used our product and it's helped them, and a lot of people have also said it's helped them more, or where just the fiber alone didn't help them. That symbiotic is very important. The probiotic and the prebiotic together is a really important aspect of that. But then you also talk about like insoluble fibers, so they're adding bulk to your digestive system and that sort of thing. And a lot of that is about getting the digestive system to retain more water. So water is a very important part to proper digestion, and that just on the surface is a big deal. Now, if you take something like so inulin fiber is a very much a fiber that we would get within our normal eating fruits and that sort of thing. Whereas you take something like psyllium husk, that's not really a normal fiber, but it is a insoluble fiber that a lot of people do use. But it would also be like, well, you could just eat like some lettuce and or some sort of leafy vegetables and those sorts of things to get that bulking insoluble fiber. But there's a whole lot more to the story when it comes to things like IBS and constipation, rather than just these this physical aspects of it. There's a chemical aspect of it as well. And we know that the microbiome plays a big role in helping the gut to signal when's the proper time to produce serotonin and these other neurotransmitters. So the gut, as you know, is a lot of times referred to as the second brain, the enteric nervous system. We have this huge amount of nerve cells in the gut. And one of the things that happens in the gut is like 90% of the serotonin in the body is produced in the gut. The serotonin that's produced in the brain has a certain role to play in the brain and the central nervous system. The serotonin is an essential neurotransmitter for many functions in the body. One of those is gut motility and signaling to the cells in the gut to function properly, in addition to what we talked about with the short chain fatty acids and the B vitamins. All of these things working together to do many functions in the body, but one of them is proper digestive function. So it's not just about, am I getting enough water into the digestive tract while I'm digesting my food? It's also, is the gut healthy? Is the serotonin production being done at the correct times and the correct amounts and all these sorts of things? And that's largely connected to the gut microbes. We also know that the microbes themselves can produce neurotransmitters. And this is getting back to cognitive function, and all of this relates back together, is that there's also another hormone called corticotropin release factor that's produced in the brain, but it's also produced in the gut. And it's produced by the same cells that produce serotonin in the gut. And so they've seen now that when you're in dysbiosis, not only are you producing less serotonin, which has an effect on signaling to the gut to have proper timing with gut motility, regularity, but we're also producing more of the corticotropin. So you get a double whammy. You're producing more of this corticotropin factor, which is the hormone that gets the body to release adrenaline and cortisol, and you're getting less serotonin. So you're getting you're getting too much cortisol and too little serotonin, and that really affects the digestive system and how we're digesting food and how we're moving through food through the body. But that's also kind of a signal to a lot more things that are going wrong in the body, because what's really happening there is in a stressful situation in a natural environment. What we would do is the brain and the central nervous system would say it's under threat and I need more energy, and it tells the gut to shut down. So the gut might get constipated, or you might get diarrhea, whatever, but you quit digesting your food so that your brain and your central nervous system has more energy to source for the job it needs to do under that stressful situation. But when that stress and chronic situation continues on and on and on, then you start to actually cause sort of this reciprocal effect on damaging the gut and the gut microbiome, and then creating an environment that's pro pathogenic, and then you stay in this loop of higher cortisol, lower serotonin, and you need to do things to try and get that back in balance. And that's kind of like our product is meant to be a supporting product for what we got from our mothers at birth, but sometimes you got to go in and do something to help support that, which includes eating the right foods and the right diet and all of these kinds of things. But once that gut gets in dysbiosis, it's very hard to get it back into homeostasis. So Mother Nature provided, Bacillus coagulans and inulin to be transitory, to be something that goes through. It's not colonizing. It goes through, and it does a job that helps support those other colonizing microbes.
Now, you mentioned how we inherit our gut health from our mothers, and I totally agree with you there. C-sections are super common these days. But I was thinking part of the problem too is the mothers themselves are unhealthy to begin with. They've got dysbiosis before they even conceive. And so my previous question was, have you noticed a benefit with your customers who aren't necessarily eating a healthy diet? But if you were to recommend like a specific diet, lifestyle changes, what would you recommend to everybody who's taking your product?
Well, yes. What specific changes in lifestyle? I mean, first, the big ones I think that we've seen with the modern, especially the Western diet, is obviously sugar. Too much carbohydrates and too much sugar. I don't necessarily know that, I think people should try things like paleo diets and carnivore diets and those sorts of things when they need them. Certainly fasting and all of those kinds of things. But, also if we look at the seasonality of how we would have eaten in nature, it would have been, certain times of the year we would have had green leafy vegetables and we would have had fruits, and other times of the year we would have been more of a high protein meat based diet and things like that. So I'm not necessarily, I think people should try and rotate through things, and I think people need to pay attention to what's affecting them as individuals, because there are genetic aspects to these different things. There's also moderation in certain things that we should be able that we should be able to manage a certain amount of something, but then too much of it, too much of something, too much of a good thing is not good, and all that sort of thing. So I would say, the carbohydrates is one that we're just can't get. It's so hard to get away from them, but that definitely affects the gut microbiome itself. If you're eating too much, the carbohydrates do in and of themselves create dysbiosis. Then you add into that dairy. Not necessarily. I mean, fermented dairy is a little different category than straight milk, but we absolutely know that the Western world, the Europeans and the Americans, we consume way more milk than would normally be, or on ice cream and things like that, than the rest of the world would consume. And that's an issue because we also know very well that the human body sort of starts to phase out production of the enzymes that allow us to break down those dairy proteins just after we're infants, really. And as we age, we produce less and less of that. And I think at some age, it's like most of the population produces like none of that enzyme. After I forget what age it is, but it's that's something that we just continue to put into our diet that we really aren't designed to consume for our entire lives. And then obviously trying to stay away from pesticides. Our bodies have some resiliency. I mean, and it's expensive to eat organic, and they're making it more expensive to eat organic. But if you can try to stay away from pesticides and some of these other additives that we're putting into food as preservatives, that's going to be very important. And then, of course, when you get to the processed foods, you got to read the label and really try to stay away from the heavy preservatives. Hopefully, the Maha movement is going to do a lot for us there, where we don't have to worry as much about reading the label, but you need to read the labels. You really do. And a lot of stuff that's being pointed out about the food colorings and things like that. These things just don't really have a place in our diet.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's going to take a very long time to get to the point where we won't have to worry about reading labels
Yeah.
anymore. But the Maha movement, I think they're doing great things. You're definitely speaking my language. I'm more about following more of an ancestral diet where it's about like you eat what's in season according to where you live. So like if you're eating bananas in January in Utah where I am, that doesn't really make sense. In fact, maybe bananas don't make sense at all because you can't grow bananas here at all.
Yeah.
Um, but then at the same time, it's like I think a lot of people really are over consuming carbohydrates, especially in their refined form. And our ancestors didn't do that because they didn't have access to refined carbohydrates, at least not until, oh, I'm not sure exactly when sugar came around. Like I want to say the 1600s, but that was only for the rich. And then it became a little bit more mainstream starting in the 1800s, along with white flour. And ever since then, it's only gotten worse and worse. But then, yeah, life expectancy has improved, but our instances of chronic disease have just declined significantly, especially in the last few decades. And I think it's all about the processed foods that we're eating and the toxic environments that we're living in.
Sure. And I think there's a lot of empirical evidence to support everything you're saying, because if you look at death rates in previous generation, I mean, a lot of those were infectious disease and things of that nature. But you look at somebody like a group of people like the Amish today, they're very limited in how much they use modern medicine. They're very, they're very conservative in how they do those things, and they have great lifespans and health spans is very good. And the same thing when you see in a lot of these other areas of the world where people have long like longevity. They're not relying on modern medicine to any large extent. Only the way that would really make sense that we should use it, and that's when it's the last resort, when we really we our bodies tell us this is when you need this kind of care. But because of the way we've sort of set things up with the healthcare system, it encourages people to rely on medicine and to go to the doctor and to get a pill and all of these kinds of things. And I mean, we have done some good things with like preservation of food. If you kind of look back in history, I mean, we relied heavily on salt for preserving everything. That's not particularly good either. And then nitrates were pretty good. So, I mean, and we do have some advantages with refrigeration and freezing capacity that we hadn't had even up until, really uh, middle part of the 20th century, when it became really prevalent to everybody to have refrigerators and stuff in their house. And so we kind of, as individuals, we're also a little bit got to blame ourselves for, and I'm very guilty of this too, of wanting to take shortcuts. In other words, you got a refrigerator, that's a freezer. You have ways to preserve food without the preservatives, but it's really convenient to go down to the restaurant or whatever, or to the grocery store and pick up the things that are shelf stable, sit on the shelf, or have, been full of preservatives. So you do have, if you put the effort into it, we do have some opportunities that previous generations didn't have, that we need to, we do need to take advantage of.
Yeah, refrigeration, I think, is one of the healthiest preservation methods,
Yeah.
or freezing rather. And I was going to mention too, shelf stable foods or highly processed preserved food is actually it's more cost effective for the stores as well
Yep.
because they can keep it on the shelf. They don't have to worry about it going bad before somebody buys it, unlike produce that they're throwing out every day. So,
Yeah, 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 exactly. And that's not all. I mean, it's not all bad in the sense that it's allowed people to survive and to live lives in some certain economic ways. But if you don't keep a spotlight on these things, what do? They start using the worst kinds of preservatives. They start using the worst kinds of preservation methods. As individuals, they don't tell us how to the best way to prepare foods that have been preserved. And so it's kind of like you have this information and knowledge, but then it gets abused. So it's same thing with medications and those sorts of things. We just start to rely on them, like, hey, just take a pill. Don't try to figure out what the problem is. Just take the pill. It's the same thing with moderation and preserved foods. And what kind of if not there calling out the companies, well, they're going to put whatever kind of preservative they can find and put it in there, rather than what might be the most the safest and most healthy kinds of ways to preserve foods and that sort of thing. I mean, I guess I'm hearing a lot. I haven't been following the story, but I just keep seeing stuff about something with Campbell's soup here lately. I don't know what they've done, but it's, again, I mean, I think at one time, I might be wrong, but I think if you go back not that long, I think most people consider Campbell's soup to be a pretty decent product. And so what have they done? I don't know, but they've done, what have they started putting in? How have they started preserving things, or how have they changed the meat? I mean, is it the chicken not a whole chicken anymore? Is it, stuff like that.
It's the lowest quality ingredients possible to get
Yeah.
people to still buy it. So I have
Yeah.
noticed that Campbell's tomato soup, for example, is made with high fructose corn syrup.
Uh,
So there's an example of a really processed carbohydrate that just creates dysbiosis and many other problems. But then they're not sourcing the highest quality tomatoes either. Like it's not organic. They're not very selective for quality. They just want to have the product that they can put on shelves. And so, I mean, that's kind of my take on it. That's
yeah.
what I've noticed. And so I won't even touch that stuff just because I know that it's not really food.
Yeah.
Um, we are coming up on the end of our time here. So I've got a couple more questions for you just to wrap up. One is, if you could change one thing about the way people approach health and wellness, what would it be?
Well, the one thing I would change is how people approach health and wellness. I would say not looking to the mainstream for solutions. We've put I mean, I think from the time I've been a kid and in school and looking back, I'll say the food pyramid that we know is so messed up. We've really, for some reason, really given our health and wellness over to Big Brother. And
Mhm.
yeah, we just keep doing it all through life. I mean, I run into people who I think are fairly, really health conscious, but the first thing they want to do is run the kid to the doctor for this or that or the other, rather than trying to find out how they could maybe change their lifestyles to fix the problem. So people getting away from reliance on Big Brother and somehow, yeah, taking that approach of thinking for yourself, and yeah, and
Yeah.
community involvement. I mean, that's the one thing I was speaking to somebody else on another podcast. It's hard from my perspective to really know how the direction the world's going in, because I spend so much of my time around people who are health conscious and are aware of all of these issues with food and health and nutrition, that it makes me feel like we're going in a better direction. But I don't really know if that's true or not, because I'm who I'm spending my time around, and what
Mhm.
I'm reading. It makes me feel like people are waking up. But I think that's what I would encourage people to do is don't think that Big Brother has got your best interests in mind when it comes to your health. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, good
Yeah.
advice. One last question for you. If people wanted to find you or find your product even, can you share where they can find you?
Sure. It's just the best place to go is goodbrew.com. That's spelled BRU. So GOODBRU.com. And if you're listening to this around the holiday season, we have some specials on the website, and you can use the promo code Merry Christmas to even get an additional discount on top of the specials.
All right.
And we always try to keep our product priced well. We price it very competitively because we do have a lot of people who reuse our product and use it on a regular basis. So we're not trying to be a product that charges a lot one time. We do try to always just keep it priced very, very competitively, and we like I said, we use no preservatives or processing aids. It's just organic agave inulin and Bacillus coagulans, a probiotic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It was great.
Thank you, Cody. It was really nice to have a conversation with you.
Real Food Mental Health is for informational and entertainment purposes only. I do not necessarily agree with all of the views shared by guests. The information presented on this podcast is not intended to replace any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. While I am a healthcare provider, I am not your provider. Always seek the advice of an appropriate healthcare practitioner with any personal questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this podcast. Reliance on information provided by this podcast is at your own risk.